Hello, and welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime Adventures in Nature Lab program. I am Beth Erickson from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. Our topic today is the owls of Pennsylvania. And with us is Chris Kemmerer, Chief of the Education and Interpretation Section for the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources at Pennsylvania State Parks. Hello, Chris. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Beth. I'm excited.
I am too. So start by telling our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I have been with Pennsylvania State Parks since 2005, and I work in what we call our Outdoor Programming Services division. So I'm the Education and Interpretation Section Chief. So if you're not familiar with Pennsylvania State Parks, we have 121 state parks. We're one of the largest systems in the country, and we have about 100 educators across those 121 state parks. So my job is to kind of coordinate all of their programming and ultimately to support all of their great work that they do and really promote all the amazing programming that we do. And we have a wide range of programming, from outdoor recreational programming to school programming to teacher professional development to cultural and historical programming. And of course, a lot of programs about our wildlife and our plants like we're doing today.
That's great. But in your daily work, you don't typically work with owls. This is a personal interest in birding and owl research, correct?
Yes, it very much is.
Tell us how you became interested in owls.
So I've been an avid birder. I've been interested in birds for a really long time. And then after college, I had the privilege of being a seasonal field biologist for the Nature Conservancy, doing field research for an endangered songbird species in Texas. And then I worked for a state office of the Audubon Society for a while. So that just kind of kept on building my skills and my knowledge around birds. And then when we moved to Harrisburg, I went to Wildwood Park, which is the county park just north of Harrisburg. And the educator there was talking about how she banded hummingbirds. And I just thought that was one of the coolest things. So I started up a conversation with her, and I had mentioned that I had banding experience as well. And she said, well, would you like to volunteer for this Northern Saw-Whet Owl project? At this point, I had no idea what a Northern Saw-Whet Owl was, but I said yes, because I couldn't resist. And as soon as I saw my first one, I was hooked. I was done. And I've been interested in owls ever since. And that's been over 12 years now. So yeah, they are a favorite.
That's great. It's wonderful to find something you're passionate about. So go ahead and tell us more about the owls here in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely. So let's get started with this. All right, so the owls of Pennsylvania. So we have a really good kind of half an hour plan for you all. As Beth said, as we already said, my name is Chris Kemmerer. I love owls, and we're going to learn about owls today. So a quick agenda of what we're going to be doing today. We're going to talk about the characteristics of owls and kind of what makes an owl an owl. Then we're going to talk about the owls that we have here in Pennsylvania. We'll touch on some research that's happening around owls and conservation. I'll share some resources with you where you can learn more about owls, and then we'll open it up to questions at the end. So to get started, I'd like to get a little bit of information from you all. So when you think of an owl, what are those characteristics that tend to come to mind, right? So when you think of an owl, what are the things that pop into mind? Put those in the chat, and Beth's going to let me know what you all think. So when you think of an owl, what do you think of?
We have wisdom, a swiveling head, another rotating head, which is something I think of. Eyes. Someone said eyes.
Okay.
I like the wisdom though. Another said their ears, beak, feathers, wings. They see in the dark.
Okay. Yeah.
Nocturnal. We're getting nocturnal answers. Live in trees. Great at blending in. I think you have an audience who's definitely interested in owls.
Oh yeah, this is good. All right, we're gonna have a good time. So yeah, so owls are all of those things, but there are certain characteristics that are kind of very specific to owls and make them unique amongst other birds. So we're going to talk about their face and their ears and how those two things work together to provide a really amazing sense of hearing. We're going to talk about their eyes, We're going to talk about how they eat, and we're also going to talk about those feathers, because those are some of the characteristics that are pretty unique among owls. So we're going to start just with um, the sense of hearing. We're going to start with your face. So one of the things that you may notice with this particular owl, this is a barn owl, it has a very heart-shaped face, right? It's kind of almost very circular, and that's called a facial disc. This is something that all owls have. Some of them are much more pronounced, like this barn owl, others not quite so much, but they all have them. And basically what it does, it acts like a funnel, and it helps to funnel sound into their ears, and it helps with their hearing. Another unique adaptation that owls have in terms of their hearing are their ears. Their ears are asymmetrical. Not all owls, but most owls have asymmetrical ear openings. So if you think about us as humans, our ears are placed on opposite sides of our head, and they're equal, up and down, they're kind of opposite each other, right? They're symmetrical. But in owls' ears, they're off center. And the reason for that is so that they can help to pinpoint or triangulate different sounds. Somebody had mentioned that owls were nocturnal, and that means that they're active during the night. So with that, they're typically flying and hunting in really low light conditions. And while they do have really good eyesight, they need to rely on their other senses to enable them to really hunt efficiently. And one of those senses that are heightened for them is their sense of hearing. So between having that facial disc that acts like a funnel, having these asymmetrical ear openings that help them pinpoint better where their prey is, these are all adaptations that help with their sense of hearing. And of course, when we think about owls, we can't stop but not think about their eyes, particularly their big golden eyes. And it is true, owls have really unique eyes, and they are very much a characteristic of them. So first of all, owls have really large eyes for how big their body is. So if an owl were the size of a human, so I'm 6 foot tall, so if an owl was as big as me, they would have eyes the size of a navel orange, or a baseball, a little bit bigger than a baseball. So think about all the room that would take up in their head. That's a really large eye, and that's so that they have a lot of room for a lot of rod cells. So those are the cells that collect a lot of light. The other thing that's unique about their eyes is that they're not necessarily an eyeball like what we would think of. They're not spherical shaped. So one of the things that we're able to do is that we can hold our head really still, and we can move our eye up and down and side to side. So we can see the periphery around us without moving our head. An owl can't do that. Their eyes are stationary. They actually have a special bone that kind of locks their eye in place. So, and it's because it's so tubular in shape. So because of that, because their eyes are kind of locked in, that's why an owl can spin its head so much, so that they can have a really broad field of view. I know a lot of people think that an owl can spin its head 360 degrees around. That's not exactly true. An owl can spin its head about 270 degrees, which is about 3/4 of the way around. But with that kind of range, they're able to have a 360-degree view all around them. And there are 2 unique adaptations that they have that enable them to spin and move their head around that way. One adaptation is that they have 7 additional vertebrae than what we as humans have. The other adaptation is that we as humans, we have 2 joints that connect our neck to our backbone. Owls only have 1. So between that 1 joint and those 7 extra vertebrae, it allows the owls to move and swivel their head so that they have that 360-degree view. Another adaptation that they have are their feathers. Lots of birds have special adaptations for their feathers. Think of a penguin. They have special feathers that allow them to swim. But an owl has special feathers that allow them to hunt or fly silently. So I'll call them contour feathers or flight feathers. They're the long feathers on the wing, the ones that kind of give the bird color. They have these serrations on the end. And what they do is they kind of cut through the air to allow the bird to fly silently. So we can do a demonstration of this to kind of get a sense of how that works. So what I want you to do is hold your hands, your fingers together, kind of like you're putting them in a mitten. And then I want you to point your fingers towards your ears with your palms facing your shoulders and move your hands up and down really, really fast. Chances are not only are you going to feel some wind, but you're going to hear some noise. You're going to hear that wind moving around. Now what I want you to do is do the same thing, but with your fingers all splayed out wide open. Fingers pointing your ears, palms down, and flap it really fast. Chances are you're not going to hear anything, or if you do, it's going to be a lot softer and a lot quieter than when your fingers are together. And that's a really simple demonstration to kind of illustrate how the feathers of an owl work. And if you think about it, they're nocturnal hunters. They're hunting prey in the evening. So just like them, their prey is probably relying on their sense of sound to know when predators are around. So it's very advantageous for an owl to be able to come up on a prey very quietly. The next unique thing about owls is how they eat. So this is a barred owl eating crayfish. And unlike a lot of animals, so other raptors, other birds, owls eat their food whole. So that means they will eat the fur and the bones and everything goes in. But not all of that is able to be digested. So the elements of that prey item, typically the fur and the bones, probably the exoskeleton, the claws of that crayfish, aren't able to be digested and consumed by the owl. So what happens is that in the digestive system, in the digestive tract of the owl, it compresses those undigestible bits, the bones and the fur, into what we call an owl pellet. So the owl pellet is this kind of like brownish gray thing in that upper right hand corner of the picture. And then it has all of the elements of what it preyed upon, the fur, some of those bones, whatever couldn't be digested. What's really interesting and cool about owl pellets is that you can purchase them from Carolina Scientific, probably off of Amazon, and they come sterilized to your house. So you can kind of dissect them yourself and figure out what owls were eating. This one we can look at, and it was probably some kind of rodent based on that tooth right there. So there really aren't any other birds that have this kind of way of regurgitating what they're unable to eat. So that's pretty unique amongst owls. So those are some characteristics that kind of make owls an owl. But let's get to know who the owls are that we have here in Pennsylvania. So we're going to talk about our resident owls first. Our resident owls are those owls that live year-round in Pennsylvania and have all aspects of their life cycle occur within Pennsylvania. So that means they nest, they raise their young, and they overwinter here in Pennsylvania. So we're going to talk about the great horned owl, the eastern screech owl, and the barred owl. So the great horned owl, I would say, is kind of your stereotypical owl. I feel like when most people think of an owl, it's the great horned owl that they think of. It's a large owl, it has those ear tufts, it has those golden eyes, and it's what informally birders call a hoot owl. So they have that very kind of stereotypical hoot, hoot call. They're a very widespread owl. Their preferred habitat are second growth forests and farm fields, and the vast majority of forests here in Pennsylvania are second growth. So they're found throughout the state. And also amongst not just owls, but among raptors, so among hawks and falcons, they have like the widest diet. They'll eat the greatest diversity of animals, prey items, than almost any raptor. So between having such a really kind of broad diet and then knowing that their habitat, their preferred habitat is pretty much 60% of the state, you can pretty much find them anywhere. They're really widespread. And because of those reasons too, they're of relatively low conservation concern. So they're an owl that you probably will get to hear, hopefully at some point. The next owl that we'll chat about are the eastern screech owls. They're a smaller owl, but they're not our smallest. One of the most unique things about the eastern screech owls is that they come in two different color morphs, this kind of gray morph and this red morph. And the interesting thing about the morphs is that they're not regional, right? So it's not like the red owls are more of like the western range of their species, and we here in Pennsylvania have the gray screech owls. That's not really the case. Actually, here in Pennsylvania, probably about a third to three-quarters of our screech owls are gray, and the remaining quarter or third are red, and they kind of overlap. The other fun thing about screech owls is that they're not a hoot owl. They don't hoot. That's not their call. That's not their song. They actually have more of a whinny or a neigh. So they actually kind of sound a little bit more like a horse. So if it's at night and you're in a wooded area and you hear a horse and there are no stables around you, chances are you're actually probably hearing an eastern screech owl. And they're really adaptable. They basically need trees. So if you have trees in your neighborhood, particularly ones that may have a cavity, there's a really good chance that you may have screech owls where you live. So, they're in really rural forested areas of the state, but they're also in forested suburban areas. And I would probably even imagine some of our bigger city parks like Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. And they've also been known to use nest boxes as well. So that just kind of, hints at kind of how adaptive they are. And then our third residential owl is the barred owl. That it's named because of this barring that it has across his chest, right? These kind of stripes of brown and white. It is a hoot owl, but it asks a lot of questions, specifically who's cooking. It's more of a who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all? And you'll hear that kind of repeated in different kind of phrases. Some are longer, some are shorter. But if you hear this kind of hoot where it sounds like somebody's asking you who's cooking, chances are it's a barred owl. What's also kind of unique about a barred owl is that they prefer to be near water, so creeks and streams, ponds and lakes. If you remember back a couple slides, that barred owl was eating a crayfish, right? So that's kind of their habitat and kind of what they prefer. And then we have some migratory owls. So starting in the upper left and kind of working counterclockwise, we have the short-eared owl, the long-eared owl, my favorite, the northern saw-whet owl, and the barn owl. So as migratory species, chances are they are breeding and raising their young elsewhere, and then they're kind of moving through Pennsylvania, or they're overwintering in Pennsylvania. Or they could be raising their young here and then moving further south or out of the state during the winter. But for short-eared owls, I think that they are really, really interesting owls because they are in many ways the antithesis of what we think of as a stereotypical owl. They are pretty limited to meadows and open grasslands. That's what they hunt. They don't go into forests. They don't necessarily even really kind of perch on trees or need trees, for any part of their life cycle. A lot of owls will build nests in cavities or the empty hollows of trees. Not short-eared owls, they actually nest on the ground within the grasslands. They're also a really far-ranging species, meaning you can find them in Alaska and the tundra of Canada, all the way down through Mexico into South America. There's even a subspecies of short-eared owls that are native to Hawaii. So they are everywhere. And the other really kind of unique thing about short-eared owls is that they tend to be very active during the day. So they're not strictly diurnal, which is meaning active during the day, but compared to other owls, they're very active during the day. So short-eared owls are really, really cool owls. I have never got to see one, and it's definitely an owl that I want to see. The next owl is our long-eared owls. I think you could probably all guess where it got its name. Those ear tufts are quite big. It too likes to hunt in meadows and grasslands like that short-eared owl, but they do need that dense cover of evergreens and more of a wooded forested area. And they are also one of those classic hoot owls that I was talking about earlier. Now for my favorite owl, our northern saw-whet owl. It's our smallest owl. It weighs about as much as a deck of cards. They're about 7 inches tall. So they could probably fit into like a standard size glass of water or something. But what's kind of interesting about the northern saw-whet owls is that we didn't know a lot about them. Like even through the 70s and early 80s, we did not really know a lot about the northern saw-whet owls, but through some of the research that's happening, we've discovered some things about them. We found that there are irregular migration routes, right? So they always migrate, so every winter they will move south, but they don't follow any particular path, right? Lots of raptors will follow the ridge, the Kittatinny Ridge, and kind of move down the Appalachians. A lot of songbirds will follow the waterways or the coastline, and they have like a very kind of dedicated path that they follow. Not northern saw-whet owls. We've had owls that we've banded here in Pennsylvania, and in 2 or 3 years later show up in Wisconsin. We've had owls that went as far south as Virginia one year, but 2 years later they're being discovered in Ontario. So they're really irregular with kind of where they go and how they migrate, which is still a mystery. We're really not quite sure why that is. And then their population is really cyclical. So their populations kind of goes up and down a lot year to year. And it all has to do with the cone crops in northern New England and into Ontario and Quebec, and just how much prey they have. So if there's a lot of prey, because there were a lot of seeds from the cones, they're going to have a lot more young, and the young are going to have a higher survival rate. And they're not a hoot owl. They toot. That's all I can say. They toot. It's really, really quite adorable is the best way to describe it. And then our kind of last migratory owl are barn owls. We certainly know that they nest here in Pennsylvania, that they are migratory. They're a barn owl because, well, they like to nest in barns and kind of farm outbuildings, and their primary habitat is to hunt those agricultural fields for mice. I think they are probably one of the most striking and beautiful owls that we have. And I think you would agree, even though kind of looking at those other ones is very different in appearance. And their call is unlike anything. It is a shriek, raspy, I don't know. It's scary, really. If you did not know what it was, you would probably get some goosebumps kind of going down your neck. They have a really unique, haunting call. And the final owl that we're going to be chatting about today is an occasional visitor. We don't get them every winter, but we get them sometimes, and that is a snowy owl. So snowy owls are native to the tundra and the Arctic in northern Canada. But every once in a while, we'll have what we call an eruption. So we'll have a lot of owls coming down and overwintering in Pennsylvania and throughout the mid-Atlantic. Typically, they like treeless, open, wide spaces, which makes sense because their main breeding grounds and main habitat is the tundra. So even when they come here into Pennsylvania and overwinter, you're going to find them in agricultural fields or more low-lying kind of flat areas. Even when they perch, they don't perch super high. They'll probably keep to about 10 feet. And what I mean by an eruption year, it's very similar to what I mentioned about the saw-whet owls, where their population is very up and down and cyclical. So years where there is a really high population of lemmings, which is their primary prey, they're able to feed their young, so they have a higher survival rate. So on years when we get a lot of snowy owls in Pennsylvania, it's because they were so successful in nesting, and there was just kind of like a bump in the population that particular year. And this is another owl that a lot of research is happening about. So the two main research projects that I want to highlight, mainly because these are the two that I'm aware of, I'm sure there are many others. The one is called Project Owlnet. It started, I think, over 25 years ago in Maryland, and it's expanded down into Virginia, up through New England and into southern Canada, and all the way west into Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin. And basically, it started as a way to get information about how saw-whet owls are migrating. And then from there, we still have lots of questions, but then that's one of the ways that we learned about this cyclical nature to the population. So not only has this research project expanded in terms of the geographic range and all the study sites that are kind of under it, but it's also expanded to include boreal owls and long-eared owls. Here locally within South Central Pennsylvania, there are 3 study sites as part of Project Owlnet that are kind of run and operated through the Nesmith Center for Nature and Art. So that's the project that I volunteer with every year, and that's how I started to kind of really get to know these guys. And then another interesting research project is Project Snowstorm. Again, it doesn't have quite as long of a history as Project Owlnet, but it's focused more on the wintering birds of snowy owls that come into the mid-Atlantic. And again, they're a collective group of pretty much volunteer researchers that are doing this work. And what they're doing is they're putting transmitters on the owls to track their movements, to get a sense of basically where they're going and what they're looking for in that winter habitat. Through some of this research, that's how they kind of got to have an idea that it wasn't scarcity of food in the tundra that was pushing them south, but it was an increase in population. It was just like a banner year, a really high success rate that was kind of pushing them. And they found really interesting things. So like, as I was reading about this research project, because I was aware of it, but didn't know the details of it, they have tracked and found that they will go out 10 to 20 miles out into open ocean and hunt ocean birds. They then just perch on buoys, and through the tracking, they have discovered that some owls have favorite buoys, which is really kind of interesting. So there's a lot of interesting research, and whenever you do research, you always get more questions, right? The information you receive ends up having more questions, so that's always exciting. So there are a ton of resources, there are a ton of places to go and learn more about owls. Of course, the State Museum is a really good way to do that. We in Pennsylvania State Parks will do owl programs all the time. We tend to do a lot of them in the winter, so definitely check out our calendar of events. But right now, if you really want to learn a lot about owls, I'm going to encourage you to go to allaboutbirds.org. It is a wealth of information. It's maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is one of the premier institutions doing research and conservation work on birds. And one of the things that I do find that I really like about that website is that they have audio files. So those owls that I mentioned, the eastern screech owl, the barn owl, and the northern saw-whet owl, those owls that aren't those classic hoot owls that have kind of crazy calls, you can go onto allaboutbirds.org, type in eastern screech owl, and it'll bring up audio files so you can kind of listen to kind of what that sounds like. So so there's a lot of great information, and I really encourage you after we're done here today to kind of do a little bit more research and to find out a little bit more about the owls that interested you. But with that, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Chris, thanks so much for that great owl information. So we're going to check in with questions. We ask that our audience put the question in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as we can. So we'll start with asking, you shared that owls are predators that hunt and eat other animals. What animals are predators of owls?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Well, there's no short answer, but so it depends on the owl, and it depends on kind of where they are in their life. So if they're a nestling, or even if they're just an egg in the nest, you'll have snakes, raccoons, possums, other things will kind of go and predate on that nest. But when we're thinking about adult owls, it really varies, right? Our northern saw-whet owls are the smallest owl. Other owls will prey on them. Great horned owls will prey on a saw-whet owl. Even a screech owl will go after a saw-whet owl. But then you go to the opposite side of that, the snowy owls. They're the largest owls that we have here in Pennsylvania. They have very few predators, but in doing my research for this presentation, I learned that bald eagles will actually prey on snowy owls sometimes. So yes, they have predators, and it all depends on what kind of owl you are and how old you are. So what wants to eat you?
The bigger and the stronger gets to eat the smaller and weaker.
Pretty much. Yep.
Okay. Well, one of our listeners wants you to know that the barn owl looks like an owl in the cartoon series The Owl House, and the snowy owl looks like the owl Hedwig in Harry Potter.
Yes, I am familiar with Hedwig, but I'm not familiar with the first one. I'll need to check that out.
Okay. Well, in our area, what's the best place to go and look for owls? Well, I guess it depends on where you are in Pennsylvania, but in what kind of areas would work?
You know, it's gonna be such a kind of anywhere. I know that sounds really bad, but it should be much more specific than that. But what I would say is that chances are you're probably not going to see an owl, mainly because they're most like active at night. So you're probably not going to see them when they are active. And then during the day, they have such good camouflage. You're probably not going to see them perched up in a tree. However, you are going to be able to hear them really well. So that's why it's kind of it's fun to kind of learn their calls. So think about some of those things that I was saying about their habitat. So if you're thinking about an eastern screech owl or a great horned owl, you want to be in more of a wooded area. Even a sawa is going to want more of a wooded area. So maybe you're camping at a state park this summer, or maybe you have a park or even your backyard. Maybe it's fairly wooded with some trees. Just give a listen. On the flip side, when we're talking about the barn owls and the snowy owls, you're going to look for farm fields, basically agricultural fields. And I know, and same with the short-eared owls too. You'll want to kind of look in more of those meadow grassland areas. There is an app and a website. It's called eBird. It's sponsored by Cornell. So oftentimes it's community science. So we as individuals can say, hey, I saw this owl here, or I heard this owl there. So you can kind of type in what owl you're looking for, and maybe you'll discover that a great horned owl was heard at your local community park, and you can go for a walk at that local community park and try to listen for the great horned owl.
Well, since you're mentioning the great horned owl, one of the listeners said, for the owls that don't migrate, why do we only hear them hooting certain times of the year? They have a pair of great horned owls that they've been hearing and seeing recently in a park, but they don't hear them year round. So, and then their second question is, what do those hoots mean?
So actually the two questions kind of go hand in hand. So much like all birds, there are kind of two main reasons why a bird, whether it's an owl or not, is going to make a call. It's going to make a sound. One, it's going to be as a warning, or two, it's going to attract a mate. So owls, they actually tend to mate in the wintertime. So kind of like right around now, so December, January into February is probably when you're going to hear owls making a lot more noise, particularly the great horned owls and the larger owls, because this is kind of when they kind of start to, maybe not as early as now, but certainly winter, like January into March, you're going to hear them because that's when they're beginning to nest. So you're going to hear them more then because they are trying to attract a mate. The summertime is going to be a little bit more quiet because they're not really trying to attract a mate. The young may have been fledged at that point, so they're not worried about defending a territory, which would be part of that warning call. So that's why you're not hearing them year round, because they essentially don't have a need to kind of make calls year round.
That's a great answer. So now we're going to move to the pellets, and everybody wants to know about the owls throwing up the pellets. So how do they throw them up? About how long does it take for them to consume and then process that? Give us a little more information about that.
All right. So it kind of depends on the owl and the frequency in which they eat. So, but so in terms of how often they do it, I would say they probably produce an owl pellet at least once or twice a day. And in terms of how long it takes, that I don't know. I can't answer that. That is research that I would need to do.
Wonder if it kind of varies like other animals do, depending upon how much you're eating and when you ate and what you're doing.
I think so. I would imagine. I would imagine eating like a small mouse is going to be very different than, say if a great horned owl is able to take a squirrel. Those are very two different, like, size prey items. Um, so, so yeah. So I think, like, I definitely know that it's once or twice a day. The other thing too is it's more just of like a coughing kind of reaction. So yeah, yeah, there's nothing fancy about it. They're just, how a cat coughs up a hairball? It is a very similar action. Not exact, but it's similar.
One might be a little easier to clean up than the other. Um,
Yeah.
so speaking of that, and people, I know that people have, we have conflict throughout areas where people live with wild animals. So can owls be considered a pest animal?
Um,
If you have,
I,
say,
I,
small cats in
yeah,
your yard
yeah.
or dogs and a great horned owl, is it, there might be a little
I,
problem there?
perhaps maybe. My inclination is to lean towards no.
Okay.
Um, I haven't heard of many reports of owls like attacking pets or anything like that. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen. But I would say it's probably more restricted to like, oh, if you have chickens and you let them out at night, that kind of situation, perhaps. Um, and even then, it's probably is going to be your larger owls that may be doing that. I really I don't know. I tend to skew towards the answer of no. Um, and at the same time, I have a hard time saying that they're, even if they are, you know, we moved into where they were. So
Yes, yeah,
we need to be a bit respectful sometimes.
that's true. And I can actually see where they could be a benefit if you are somebody with a farm or you're living in a rural area where they're going to
Mhm.
get rid of those rodent pests that you might not want in your house.
Yes, like in that way, I would, yeah, they're probably much more helpful in that regard than they are more of a pest species. Yep.
Well, speaking of eating again, you had mentioned the lemmings in the tundra region, and one of our listeners wants to know why would they be in short supply?
Well, just like well, honestly, my my gut instinct and response on that question is that all populations have like influxes of populations like up and down, and it all typically really kind of ties to a food source. So I will say I am not familiar with lemming biology in any way. So I really do not know what they typically eat. But if I were to wager a guess, I would wager a guess that whatever they are eating, just one year they didn't have, it just wasn't a really large crop, or they didn't have enough to eat. Therefore, they weren't able to produce as much young, and therefore that population kind of declines a little bit. And then other years, there is a banner crop of whatever it is that they're eating. Therefore, they're much more successful in reproducing. There's a lot more lemmings, and therefore there's a lot more prey. So that is certainly, it's just the ebb and flow of natural cycles. It happens across virtually all ecosystems have that happen. So
That's very true. And as you mentioned, with the owls that migrate, there are times when we see the snowy owls, and there's times that we don't. So, um, question on that. The question is, do you know the tracking on owls that migrate? For instance, where they start and end. So maybe how far away do owls come from?
um, so we have a little bit of that information. Um, so like so I can speak for the northern saw owl. That's the owl I'm most familiar with. We know that we know that many of them are born and nest in northern New England, so Maine, uh, northern Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Quebec and Ontario. And we know that they will fly as far south as kind of Virginia and the Appalachians. We know for sure that they can fly as far west as Minnesota. So that's a really broad range. So sometimes um, it could be thousands of miles. And that's the thing that we really don't know about saw-whet owls, is that we don't know if an individual migrates 1,000 miles every year, or if some years it's just 200 miles, and then next year it's 500, and another year it's 1,000. So we really don't know that very clearly. But yeah, so that's a tough one. So, but what we do know about owls is that they're not like a songbird, right? So they're not like, say, a wood thrush that will nest in Pennsylvania or nest in New York and then fly all the way to Central and South America for the winter. They're not doing these really, really long, epic migrations like our songbirds. They're doing much shorter, smaller migrations, and they're kind of sticking to like Canada and the US. That helps.
That's great. No. So, and this is a very, very broad question. So what about lifespan? Are there owls that live long, certain types of owls that live longer than others?
Yeah. So all the species have a different average length of time that like an average lifespan. Typically, the bigger you are, the longer you live. But I will say that is a really good. They have information on that all about birds. So they not only have their average lifespan for all 8 of those owl species that I talked about, but they also have information about when they know the oldest of them. I can't remember exactly, but I feel like the oldest wild great horned owl, and that's based on banding data, I think was over 20 years old. We as doing research for saw-whet owls, we find one that's 6 years old, we're like, ooh, that one's a little old. So it varies.
It's a tough world out there in the wild. It's definitely hard.
Particularly when you're little.
A physical question about the birds, and you had mentioned this being a unique adaptation, the asymmetrical ears and the feathers. Is that unique to owls, or are there other birds that have those adaptations?
From my knowledge, that is unique to owls.
Yeah, they are a very interesting type of bird.
Yeah.
Some birds take care of both the male and the female take care of the young, some don't. What about owls? Are the males and females both raising young?
That's a really good question. I
I'm
think
sorry,
I don't know
didn't
for
mean to
sure.
stump you.
No. Getting stumped is really good. Yeah, I'm not sure, and I have a feeling that it's probably going to vary a little bit based on species, but I can't answer that question. I don't know.
It's a good one for our listeners to go do some research.
It is a good one.
And then, are any of the owls in Pennsylvania federally protected or state protected species?
I don't know. However, I do know that the short-eared owl, the long-eared owl, and the snowy owl are actually have high levels of conservation concern, or at least that's how it was described in some of the research that I found. So I don't know if they're federally listed, but I do know that those 3 owls in particular do have high levels of conservation concern, that they are experiencing population decline. And I would say of all of them, the short-eared owl is probably the worst off. And then they're seeing fairly steady declines in population.
Well, we have a visitor who is visiting Black Moshannon State Park this weekend.
Wonderful.
And they would like to know, what are their chances of seeing an owl?
Seeing an owl? Oh, I don't know. I feel like seeing an owl is such a rare treat that is really hard. But I am going to say, to hear an owl, guaranteed. Okay. And being at Black Mo, I would imagine you have a really good chance of hearing a great horned owl, a barred owl, and an eastern screech owl for sure. Maybe even a saw-whet if you're lucky. But yeah, I think you have a really good chance of hearing one. And if you get to see one, that you very, very lucky.
Where is that park located?
It is located in Centre County, so it's about a 20-minute drive north of State College.
Okay. All right. If anybody else wants to go this weekend, they can look for owls. One last question for you. what can we do as residents of Pennsylvania to support owls in our areas?
That's a fantastic question. So there are a couple things that we can do. Actually, a really great thing is what you all are doing right now, and that's learning more about owls. So the more we understand something, the easier it's going to be for us to understand the importance for protecting them and for protecting it. To kind of expand upon that a little bit more, you are able, if you'd like, you can donate to either of those research projects that I donated. A lot of that research are all volunteers, and even the researchers themselves, while they are professional researchers, they're not necessarily being paid by like a university to do that research. They're really kind of doing it on their own because they just have a drive for that science. So you can support that research. And then other things too, if you have the privilege of having a backyard and property that you can kind of manage, think about planting native plant species. Ensure that you have varying levels. So tall, canopy trees like oaks and sycamores and those kinds of things. Make sure you have some evergreen trees in there. Make sure you have some lower and mid-height kind of trees like rhododendron and things like that. I'm telling you to go back to this All About Birds website because I absolutely love it. I go back to it all the time. It's a great resource. They actually have a section of their website for each bird. It's a section that's called Backyard Conservation, and it gives you some tips of what you can do at home to kind of help with the conservation of that particular owl species. And one last idea for the eastern screech owl, they will nest in nest boxes. And I do have a link on that resource page to instructions on how to build a nest box. So perhaps if you have some property with some trees, maybe you might want to consider putting up a nest box for a screech owl.
That's terrific. Thank you to our audience for your wonderful questions. If you want to explore more about this topic or other topics related to Pennsylvania, visit the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Bureau of State Parks websites or the State Museum of Pennsylvania website. The links are in the chat box, along with the other topic-related websites that Chris referenced. Thank you, Chris, so much for sharing this valuable information about owls in Pennsylvania.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I hope you all have walked away with new information about owls. I hope that you are more inquisitive about owls and that you'll go out and do a little bit more research and learn more about owls. But most importantly, I hope you get to hear one sometime this winter. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. For our audience, we hope that everybody will join us again on January 14th for a conversation with Tracy Graziano, who is an award-winning wildlife photographer and filmmaker with the Pennsylvania Game Commission. We were going to talk with her about her experiences documenting animals in their habitats. So you can sign up on our website for this and other upcoming virtual Learn at Lunchtime programs. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and have a great day. Goodbye.